Images and videos of burnt cars, blacked and charred bodies, and incinerated homes in southern Israel were plastered on every phone screen and television after the October 7th Hamas attacks. The images and videos were used by the Israeli government to justify the military's heavy-handed tactics in their ongoing war against Hamas. But were they actually the result of the Hamas attack? Well, surely Israeli civilians were brutally killed by Hamas on October 7th, but there's mounting evidence that we think any responsible journalist needs to examine. Let's take a look at something called the Hannibal Directive. I'm investigative journalist Ben Swann, and this is Reckoning Israel and Gaza. So far in this investigative series, we have discussed how Israel had received concrete and credible intelligence from foreign intelligence agencies, their own military, and even Israeli citizens about where and when the October 7th Hamas attacks would take place. The military rammed through the approval of the Nova Music Festival at the last minute, despite pushback from people within the army, and even threatened legal action against soldiers who tried warning and preparing for the Hamas attack. And when the attack began, what did the military do? Well, nothing. Evidence we've uncovered points to there being some type of military stand down at the beginning of the attack. But we need to take a look at another crucial aspect of that day. When the IDF began to finally use their firepower and military to engage Hamas in southern Israel, did they exclusively target enemy militants? Well, evidence actually points to no. To understand what the Israeli military did to their own civilians on October 7th, you have to understand the political aspirations of Hamas and what the goal of taking hostages is: political leverage. There are over 10,000 Palestinians in Israeli jails, 3,000 of whom have not been to trial or charged with a crime. When militant groups manage to capture Israeli civilians or soldiers, it gives them leverage to force a prisoner swap and to get some of their people out of Israeli prison. For example, in 1986, Hamas managed to kidnap 3 Israeli soldiers and bring them into Gaza. They demanded 1,150 Palestinian prisoners in return for those 3 soldiers. Well, after this, the military drafted a secret field order to prevent future kidnappings. It was called the Hannibal Directive. The directive gets its name from the Carthaginian general who chose to poison himself rather than allow himself to be captured alive by the Romans. Back in 2003, again, strangely enough, October 7th, 2003, 3 Israeli soldiers were taken hostage and brought into Lebanon. Following the activation of the Hannibal Directive, IDF attack helicopters fired indiscriminately on 26 vehicles, thus ensuring the death of their own soldiers and therefore robbing Lebanese militants of the ability to demand Israel make concessions. The last known application of the Hannibal Directive was 2014 in Rafah. Hamas fighters managed to capture an Israeli soldier, Lieutenant Haydar Golden. Instead of allowing the lieutenant to be used as leverage by Hamas, though, the military killed him, dropping bombs, missiles, and shells on the area he was being held, killing that soldier and also 100 Palestinian civilians. The scale of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th was entirely different, though, from those of the past. A retired Israeli Air Force general, Nof Erez, described it during a podcast with Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper, saying this, quote, "The Hannibal Directive was apparently applied at a certain stage, because at the moment they understand there is a kidnapping, they immediately say, guys, this is a Hannibal. But the Hannibal we trained for all of the last 20 years is for a vehicle we know at what point the fence it enters, on what side it drives, maybe even on which road it drives. This was a mass Hannibal." Now think about that term, a mass Hannibal. We all know the Hannibal Directive means to kill your own. So what does mass Hannibal mean? Well, if you look at Israeli media, you're going to find some pretty interesting things. Let's read this quote directly from Ynet, a large mainstream Israeli media outlet. Quote, "In the week after Black Shabbat, October 7th, soldiers of elite units at the initiative of the Southern Command checked about 70 vehicles that remained in the area between the Otaf settlements and the Gaza Strip. These are vehicles that did not reach Gaza because on the way there, they were shot by a combat helicopter, an anti-tank missile or tank, and at least in some cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed," end quote. 70 vehicles. And in some cases, everyone in the vehicle was killed. These are Israelis killed by Israel. Again, only reported on in Israeli media. Here in the US, we keep seeing pictures repeatedly of cars burnt to a crisp as evidence of Hamas's barbarism. But was it Hamas's AK-47s and homemade rockets that burnt all these cars to a crisp? Or perhaps Hellfire and anti-tank missiles? Tuval Escapia is a member of the security team for the kibbutz Bereri. He set up a hotline so kibbutz residents could communicate with the Israeli army. He told Haaretz that, quote, the commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants in order to eliminate would-be hostages as well as terrorists. Shelled entire houses. Do we hear this in American mainstream media? That the Israeli military targeted and destroyed over 70 cars with Hellfire missiles that were filled with Israelis, and that they decimated entire Israeli homes with tank shells. A report in Haaretz, October 20th, notes that the Israeli military also carried out an airstrike on their own military base. That base was filled with Israeli civil administration officers and soldiers at the time. An Israeli woman named Yasmin Porat gave an interview with Israel Radio that the military undoubtedly killed numerous Israeli hostages during gun battles with Hamas militants. Listen.
בגינה של האנשים מהקיבוץ שיש 5 בני ערובה ששוכבים או 6 על האדמה בחוץ, ממש כצאן לטבח מול הירי של הימ"מ שלנו והמחבלים.
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא, הם נהרגו מהחילופי ירי, תבין שהיה חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שזה כוחותינו ירו בהם? כשניסו לחסל את החוטפים, את החמאס?
הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל בני ערובה, כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים. אני משוחררת בסביבות השעה 5:30, ב8:30 כנראה מסתיימת הלחימה, אחרי שהיה חילופי אש מטורפים.
IDF General Barak Hiram, who we covered in our previous episode, prevented hundreds of troops from entering kibbutz Bereri for hours on October 7th, when he finally allowed the IDF to go in. He ordered tanks to fire on multiple homes. The tank shells killed at least 12 Israeli hostages and 3 children. Recently, the UN published an investigation confirming several of these facts, namely that the IDF had in fact activated the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. Quote, the Commission is aware of the allegations that Israeli special forces used the Hannibal Directive to prevent the capture of Israeli civilians and their transfer to Gaza, even at the cost of killing them. The Commission documented one statement by an ISF tank crew confirming that the crew had applied the Hannibal Directive. So to recap, the Israeli military, Israeli civilians, and the United Nations all admit to the IDF purposely killing their own on October 7th. How many? Well, that's hard to tell. Tank shells hitting homes full of people, Hellfire missiles destroying at least 70 cars, mass Hannibal, but still, on social media, if you make such a claim, you're going to be hit with a community note and then promptly linked to a bogus fact-check website. The imagery of charred bodies and incinerated cars and homes are still used to this day to manufacture consent for Israel's ongoing assault on the Gaza Strip, while more than 37,000 Palestinians have been killed. During war, all sides produce propaganda, but has Israel been offering up images of the aftermath of their own assault on their own people and then presenting it as something that their enemy did? We know these claims are pretty heavy. So please fact check us and let us know if we are reporting in any way something that's inaccurate. Again, we want to know. If you haven't already, follow us on X at @truth_in_media, or you can sign up to follow this series and watch each episode as it comes out at truthinmedia.com. And again, at truthinmedia.com, by the way, you're going to find the transcript to this story along with all of the source articles. Check them out for yourself and stay tuned as we continue to unveil the truth around Israel's war on Gaza.